When I think about my favorite stories, I also often think about time. Where I was in my life. When I put the first small crease into the spine of a book, I'd go on to open hundreds of times from there. Who I was with when I sat down in a movie theater seat, Milk Duds and watermelon Sour Patch Kids in hand, and felt the rush of sound and color and wonder bloom around me. What changed for me each time I returned to those stories, which moments ported me back, like little memories nestled in the compass in my hand, to how I felt when I first met those characters or discovered that world. What felt new to me, different for me, altered in some way by the life that I'd lived in the meantime. As I mentioned before, during our Marvel run, Iron Man came out right around when I graduated from college, May 2008. It was the last movie my roommates and I piled into Carousel Center in Syracuse, New York to see before heading to different cities for the next phases of our lives. And so for me, part of the joy of the MCU has always been the associations that I've formed between these movies and the first swath of my adult life. Since Tony said I am Iron Man, I've moved to New York City and then to Los Angeles. I started working for Sports Illustrated and then Grantland and then The Ringer. I met my husband and got married. We adopted our fluffy son, Halo. And another very meaningful thing happened in my life during that time. I met you. And we started talking about stories together. And in some ways, it's just surreal to think that our entire friendship has existed inside of the lifespan of the MCU, because it feels like we've been talking about direwolves and butterbeer and Kyber crystals. Kyber! And arc reactors for as long as those things have existed. But of course, that's the real magic of it. And I'll never forget the day that Bill came into my office and said, "Hey, I have an idea for you. Binge Mode." A rewatch and a deep dive. A dive that got increasingly deep indeed. Into the first 6 seasons of Game of Thrones before the 7th season premiered. And I just couldn't believe that I got to talk to the Maester about A Song of Ice and Fire. How lucky was I? But that first burst of Binge Mode, that 6-season immersion into obsession and madness, changed things. It changed our friendship, and it changed my life. I am not sure if I can properly explain how, but I'm going to at least try. There is a moment in A Game of Thrones when Jon, contemplating his future at the Wall, rides and reflects, thinking, quote, "He had no destination in mind. He wanted only to ride. He followed the creek for a time, listening to the icy trickle of water over rock, then cut across the fields to the King's Road. It stretched out before him, narrow and stony and pocked with weeds, a road of no particular promise. Yet the sight of it filled Jon Snow with a vast longing. Winterfell was down that road, and beyond it, River Run and King's Landing and the Erie, and so many other places. Casterly Rock, the Isle of Faces, the Red Mountains of Dorne, the 100 islands of Bravos and the sea, the smoking ruins of Old Valyria. All the places that Jon would never see. The world was down that road, and he was here." It is a somber and pensive moment for Jon, one of yearning and unease. But I have always loved that passage because of what it says about possibility. I think of stories in this way, the vessels that can stop us from feeling trapped or alone, that can take us down any number of roads, that can ease that longing, even if only for the span of a few pages or the length of an episode, that can allow us to explore our world and other worlds too. And of all the things I've loved about making Binge Mode with you, that's the thing that I've cherished the most. You never once made me feel silly for thinking about it that way, quite the opposite. You reminded me time and again that the only thing better than finding a way down that road in the first place is finding someone to travel it with you. You've taught me so much. You've helped me find so much confidence. And you've showed me how many ways there are to embrace the power of imagination. One of my favorite parts about the MCU run has been hearing about how long you've loved these stories. The walks that you'd take to the comic book shop when you were a kid. The euphoria you felt seeing the panels that you pored over when you were young move and breathe years later on the big screen. I love thinking of you that way, lost in your awe and your gratitude. And I love that you've found so many ways in recent years to share that awe with so many other people. We spoke recently in our Endgame Part 2 pod of that lovely moment when Frigga tells her son, quote, "Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person of a hero is how well they succeed at being who they are." And the best stories and the best friends remind us of this. More importantly, they help us believe it. And that's not an easy thing. But one of the times consistently when it feels most natural and most possible for me is when we pop onto a Zoom and we see Steve sitting there wearing his Spider-Man mask. Or when Isaac wows us with the new theme music that he wrote. Or when Cram tells us that Doctor Strange got lazy with his 14 million scenarios. Or when we hear from the binge heads about what the pod and the community around it mean to them. When we spend hours, days, weeks, months, years, literally years at this point, mining the depths of our passion, as deep as the catacombs underneath Marine or the Chamber of Secrets or the Valkyrie's home in the ice, and find that we can never reach the bottom of it. One of the quotes that resonated with me most during our MCU binge is in Cap's letter to Tony, as we've talked about before, at the end of Captain America Civil War. Tony, he wrote, "I'm glad you're back at the compound. I don't like the idea of you rattling around a mansion by yourself. We all need family. The Avengers are yours, maybe more so than mine." I love that moment because of what it says about partnership and faith. And I love thinking of the Avengers like that, as a family that in the theme that we love to revisit time and again here across our seasons and our episodes, they chose, even when it wasn't easy. Even when it was hard to see what awaited around the next bend. And I adore this aspect of superhero stories. They're like little jewel boxes of wonder. It's an amazing thing, really an amazing thing to create characters and tales and worlds that unlock so much for so many people in so many ways. To build something one ink blot or film frame at a time that speaks to the worthiness of belief. It's thrilling to watch Cap hoist his shield and see Peter swing from the rooftops and witness Carol direct photon blasts across the room, but that's not at the heart of why we really love those characters, why we gravitate toward them, why we root for them. We love Cap because, as Erskine once told him, the serum amplifies everything that is inside, so good becomes great, bad becomes worse. This is why you were chosen. Peter, because he's the kind of person who once told Tony, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you. Carol, because of the unflinching conviction that Maria possessed when she said to her, "You were the most powerful person I knew way before you could shoot fire from your fists." On and on the list goes, character after character, movie after movie, story after story. Sometimes you forge that shared understanding with a character or a story, and it's there for you alone. Your own Bifrost bridge to a new journey, a new source of joy. Sometimes you share it. You pile into the Quinjet and you travel to reaches and realms previously undiscovered and unknown. The college pals I mentioned earlier, who I saw Iron Man with, Alice and Katie, Taylor and Suzanne. An amazing thing recently is that during quarantine, we've started talking regularly again, Zooming every few weeks. And more than a decade after we first watched Tony build his armor in a cave, we still talk about the tales that we love and how they're impacting our lives now. We catch each other up on what we've been reading and watching, what we've decided to revisit, what we've dipped into for the first time. 2 of the 5 of us have kids now, and soon those 2 will be sharing these stories with their children too. Just as my dad did with me so long ago when he put that bookshelf in my room that I've talked about before and filled it with the stories that he'd hoped I'd read one day. And when I think about that bookshelf, just like when I think about Binge Mode, it's both a time capsule and somehow eternal to me, anchored in a moment but spread across the expanse. In the message that Tony recorded for Morgan and Pepper and his fellow Avengers before he died, he said, "That's the hero gig, right? Part of the journey is the end." And it's such a deeply sad moment, but to me, it's a strangely hopeful one too. Because even though Tony is already gone as the message plays, he's the one delivering it. And the end can take so many shapes and forms, but when it comes to the stories that so many of us love and the joy that we find in sharing them together, it doesn't really have to come at all. I can't help but think of another Thrones quote from Old Man, which I wrote about and talked about in our Thrones closing thoughts back at the end of our season 8 run, but you'll forgive me for revisiting it because it feels worth remembering here too. "Stories wait, my little lord," Nan told Bran. "And when you come back to them, why, there they are. And they'll be there for us too, Jay, just waiting for us to boot up the Pym particles and the quantum tunnels in our minds, to journey back to our moments of shared discovery and visit with them for a while."
Popular culture can seem trite and infantile. I just think of the words that we associate with things that are popular: plastic, lowest common denominator, words that evoke the idea of mass production and something that doesn't have any staying power or craftsmanship. But popular culture is actually quite important. It's the space where we ask ourselves what beliefs, what values are important to us. We are increasingly divided ideologically, economically, and since COVID, physically, but popular culture is the one space in which we can all gather to talk about the things that we see and hear and read. We've used the word monoculture on this podcast a lot. That's just a smart-sounding way of saying something is a hit. It is popular, which is itself another way of saying that a story reflects values and ideas that a lot of people believe in. Or in the case of comic book movies, that people want to believe in. Even if it's for a few hours, we want to live in a world where if there must be billionaire arms dealers, at least like Tony Stark, they're billionaire arms dealers who recognize and respond to the evils that they've unleashed in the world. We want to spend time in a world where a soldier objects when his superiors fail to live up to a nation's ideals, where a black nation is free from the predations of colonialism and can rise to the pinnacle of the global community, where the gods actively protect people from harm and the bonds of friendship and family can grow even in the vacuum of space, where those who are lost could be returned with the snap of a finger, where the people who have the power to save the planet actually do it. We want to believe that a good person, given power, given wealth, given strength, given the ability to fly, to heal, to move things with their mind, to wield magic, would act with wisdom and in the interests of those who are weaker than themselves. This is the central wish that the superhero myth fulfills. The fact that we are seeing that myth being deconstructed tells us that though the genre remains strikingly relevant, we are approaching something of a crossroads. Deadpool and Deadpool 2 worked as superhero tales while effectively mocking the form's tropes. Watchmen and The Boys, both critically acclaimed and popular hits, show us what can happen when people with superpowers act exactly as cruelly as you would expect people with superpowers to act. Of course, Marvel movies and their burgeoning television offerings are not for everyone. There are many fair criticisms of the films. Their industry-altering success has pushed smaller films, for lack of a better word, more adult fare to the margins and even beyond the margins. An unfair criticism, though, in my mind, is that they are infantile or childish. As I think we've argued on this pod many times, childhood is when some of the existential questions that shape a person's life are first asked. Will I be loved? Do I belong? Am I accepted? Marvel stories answer these questions, along with the existential questions of our time, questions about the use of power, the role of government, the need for heroes, the security of the planet, in overwhelmingly positive and uplifting fashion. Their global success then speaks to humanity's innate desire to grapple with these questions. And it has been the delight of my life to talk about these stories with you, Mallory Rubin.
Same, buddy. I love it. A true joy.